welcome everyone that's joined. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So this is the third and the last in a series of 3 talks that make up this year's London Society Architecture School. My name is Parni. I'm an architect and a London Society trustee. I curated the series, and for those of you who attended all of the talks, I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't attend the other ones, that's fine. Thank you for joining us tonight. So the theme for the Architecture School this year, as you will probably be aware, is change and the public good. So an exploration of moments in London's history where development for the benefit of people, not profit, has influenced and continues to inform the built fabric of the city. Our first 2 talks were focused on infrastructure and architecture in the capital, but for this final talk, we're looking more at the means of production of the built environment, so namely forms of architectural practice and how it can be organised to promote equity. So to discuss this, we have got 2 speakers tonight. So first up, we will have Dinah Bornat from ZCD Architects, who are a research-led practice based in East London, currently working collaboratively on a number of regeneration schemes across London. And Dinah is an expert on child-friendly cities, as well as being a mayor's design advocate, and she will be talking to us about the London Practice Forum, which is a collective of London architectural practices who, in their own words, care about the city, its people, and its built environment. Our second speaker is Nisha Kurian, associate at award-winning and socially focused practice We Made That, who incidentally are also part of London Practice Forum. And Nisha has led on a range of projects, including East Street Library, which was an essential community asset in Southwark, and a transformational master plan for Purley Way in Croydon. And Nisha is going to talk to us about the Reset Go programme, which has its origins in the London Practice Forum and has been set up to provide young people from underrepresented backgrounds with experience and support as they set out on a career in architecture. And also, full disclosure, I will be joining Reset Go on a workshop for young people in the summer because I think the programme is ace. Before I hand over, I will also remind you all that the London Society Architecture School also ties in with the London Festival of Architecture, which continues to the end of the month with a programme of events linked to the theme of care. We are going to have time for questions, but we would like to keep this fluid, so you are welcome to post questions using the Q&A function in Zoom as we go, and we will try and pick them up, and we will try and keep this conversational as well. So please do feel free to get involved. So that's all from me, and over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alpa. Hi. So if you don't know me already, Alpa described me very well. So I work for practice. Well, I run a practice with Cordula Weiser called ZCD Architects, and there's 8 of us. We're female-led, and I think it's quite hard running a small female-led practice for obvious reasons. And the London Practice Forum is quite new. It's been going since the end of 2018, and arguably it was sort of set up, if you like, as it was an experiment really, where a group of practices got together for various reasons, but I think one of the obvious reasons is because they wanted to kind of support each other in the world of kind of small practice and collaborative working. We thought that actually perhaps if we got together and talked about some of the issues that we were going through, we could do things better and support each other. But also we've all got kind of big ideas, and I think we want London and the built environment to do better, and we also want to have good practices. We want to run good practices. Now, I haven't got any slides this evening because, and I usually do talk to lots of slides about my work, but I think that this is much more of a kind of chat, like as if we were standing, around a table or perhaps in a cafe or a bar. This is how we come together and kind of formalize how we might practice better. I thought that would be a bit more useful. So I think what Alpa said, and Nisha will talk in a minute about the Reset Go pattern, but what Alpa said about questions would be fine. I have to point out that I'm not the founder of the London Practice Forum. That was Russell Curtis, and he has a lot of kind of data up his sleeve, which I don't have, but I have been there since the beginning. So just go back to 2.5 years ago. We were only a year off the beginning of the pandemic. So we were kind of in our infancy when it started. We're now 25 practices, and forgive me for not knowing the exact number, but I think we may have been about 18 or 20 at the beginning. And recently we have expanded and diversified through quite a targeted approach to recruiting smaller practices that are more diverse. And that's a conversation that we've been having for a long time. And perhaps I'll get to this in a minute, but there is one of the big conversations that we have as the London Practice Forum is that we don't really want to be seen as being exclusive, because that's not the kind of point of where our work is sort of aiming. But on the other hand, there is a sense that there's a sort of limit to how we can come together and discuss issues and form a kind of consensus. So we are, I suppose, exclusive in that respect. But then what we also find is that means that we can give people support for setting up similar kinds of forums, because it's not that we want to be the only one. So I think we want to do better by what we do, help ourselves and each other, and help change things. And I don't think we should be the only ones that are doing that. So that's the kind of explanation of how sort of we are who we are, if you like. So we meet every 2 months, and to begin with, in the first year that was physically, and the big thing that we worked towards in that first year, if you like, was our ethics charter. Now everything is behind me actually on the screen is available to see on the website that Russell has built fantastically. So our ethics and principles charter is on the principles and ethical charter, I should say, is on the website. And you know, we put that together, and I think this is where a discussion is quite useful, because it is very hard to reach a decision about things where you want to be progressive, but on the other hand, you don't want to shut things down. And anyone who's been involved in kind of consensus-driven organizations will know this, the kind of pain and also reward, if you like, that you go through in writing something like this. I think what was interesting when we wrote our principles and ethical charter is the big thing that the press picked up on was that we were going to limit ourselves to the 40-hour working week, because we all felt that we didn't want to be involved in this kind of long hours practice. We didn't want it to be the culture that we even, you know, allowed to happen. And in fact, we found that most practices weren't really working those sorts of hours. And I think that's another way in which we can come together when we do, you know, any number of practices can come together and talk and find that actually some of us are doing things quite well, if you like, and we want to be able to do things better. So we want to be able to feel that doing things well works. So, you know, collectively knowing that there are 25 other practices that also don't work more than 40 hours and don't have any unpaid interns, for example, makes you feel more confident that you can do the right thing, because if they can afford to do it, then so can you. So I think there's a support level there where you can you know, the section in the website about valuing people, which describes that, is about, you know, kind of going beyond sharing best practice, which is another element of what we do. So you can imagine, I mean, we're a practice of 8. You know, we don't have a finance director, we don't even have an office manager. So where on earth do we get all of our forms and guidance, and how do we kind of push how do we have the time to sort of think about equality and diversity and inclusion, you know, best practice when there are only 8 of us and we're still sort of, you know, paddling furiously. And I think the answer is that you know, some of the larger practices, and we limit our size to the biggest practices, Morris and Co, who I think are about 50, but we want to not take it any bigger than that. But I think, you know, there are practices that we're at the very small end, and there are practices that are our size, and a few more now, seeing as we've grown a little bit. but it's a good range of practice size and experience, and so there is a way in which we can be supported by the bigger practices, but also, and I think Nisha will talk about this in a minute, and we'll kind of broaden the conversation out to, what is it about the way in which we're all collaborating these days? Because, and Alpa said this at the beginning, collaborative working is something that is now becoming completely normal in all our work. So we're working with a number of practices on the London Practice Forum, but also other practices. And it's becoming so commonplace that that kind of the kind of support, but also the kind of diverse thinking that comes with it is really rich. But when you're doing a bid with a practice, and when you're designing and kind of rushing through that process, actually the kind of bread and butter background work that you need to run a practice, you haven't got time to kind of discuss those things. And actually what we can do at the London Practice Forum, which is which is really helpful, is we can share some quite confidential information with each other, such as we can gather the data on the sort of fee levels that people are getting across bids and across the industry. And you may have noticed in the press that we've agreed as a forum that we're not going to work on or bid or work on any project, bid for any projects that are less than 60% quality to 40% price. So if it tips the balance the other way and it becomes price over quality, then we don't want to do that, because we feel that that accepting those bids just allows the industry to make that to normalize it. It's not easy. It's not easy to kind of hold back the tide. And I think that, one of the things that we've also agreed is that we will kind of how to kind of promote best practice out there in the industry is to sort of have a voice, and we can have a voice collectively against these kind of moves that really kind of cripple us as practices more effectively if we can kind of understand the background to the sort of damage that it does to us, but B, speak as one voice, and knowing that we've got the support of the other practices. So this, I think, if you want to look at what we're doing, I think it's worth going onto our website and looking at that ethics charter, principles and ethical charter rather. I think the other element of it that I'm very keen to progress and hasn't got off the ground yet, and the shame of that's because the reason for that being really because of COVID, is that if you imagine we're 25 practices, and so we could have about 50 people kind of or possibly more at a kind of decision making level, having conversations and passing quite confidential information between each other at that level. But we're also really keen to have all the other employees in the practices that make up the London Practice Forum being able to get support from each other and work with each other as well. And I think Nisha, I think Reset Go is a good example of that, because of the way in which we're talking, and different people are part of that conversation. But I think we were about to have, and this is something I was quite keen to organise, was an event where we would talk about some of the projects that we were working on, but less of a sales pitch and more of a way of kind of evaluating the design that we were doing. Something that I'm really interested in is kind of how we share space in the city, and so a kind of Petrocucha style presentation by the practices was going to happen back in March 2020, and of course it didn't. It kind of slipped between our fingers in that month. But that was the first, I think, kind of step to making our work more publicly accessible, because whilst we can make decisions and think and kind of sort of what's the word, sort of tease out all the issues around the things that we want to do in these meetings that we have every 2 months, we were also conscious that we wanted to sort of allow other people to be part of the conversation, and in terms of the work that we were doing, and listening to other people. So that feels like this isn't something we don't want to do. It's something we can't really do so easily, and perhaps we could have done it online, but I'll be honest with you, a lot of us were kind of, keeping our heads above water. But we this is something I think that I think would be quite interesting to explore as we get back into sort of normal face-to-face life, is that some of the work and the thinking and the fact that we are 25 people, 25 practices altogether, means that we can kind of quite easily organize things where other practices get involved. And in fact, Nisha, yours is an example of how you've done exactly that, but you've done it for kind of reasons of promoting, diversity. So, I'm not going to talk about that at all, but I don't want to talk for much longer because I wanted to give a bit more time for questions and perhaps explaining a bit more. So does that sound okay, Alpa? Thank you.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, thank you. Well, we don't have any questions just yet, so we will just go straight into Nisha, and then I've got, actually, no, I do have one question, so perhaps I'll just slip that in between, which is, obviously with 25 practices, I mean, you share a sort of common purpose, you've got your charter, but that's a lot of voices, and I just wondered what the potential areas of kind of discord are and how you deal with that.
It's a really good question. And I think that when we wrote that charter, it was a really good example of that, because some of us, or some of the practices, if you like, wanted to be very specific, like, not working with certain regimes or working in certain types of buildings. And we're very clear that that was something that they could stick to and wanted to stick to, and felt that, for example, meeting climate crisis targets needed that kind of, statement. And other practices felt that it wasn't something they could do. So it's a very tricky thing, consensus, because what you don't want to do is sort of water it down to the kind of lowest common denominator. And I think that where we've got to, I hope, doesn't sound too anodyne, and doesn't sound, because we were very clear that we had to do something that was beyond what the RIBA was already doing, and we kept slipping back into something that looked a little bit like what the RIBA was already saying. And I think that just demonstrates exactly what you're saying. When there's 25, it just gets more and more kind of samey. I think we have to be kind of judged on on what we do in some respects, because with some projects you can just run with them. So I think, there is a question in the chat, is that, am I? I could post a link to the chat, to the charter. I can do that. Thank you, Catherine. Sorry, I just answered a question.
That's fine. You can do that. I think as well, if you do just punch in London Practice Forum into the search.
Yeah, exactly. If you type in London Practice Forum, you will get the website, and it will be there on the website. It's very easy to find.
Great. Okay, well, thank you. I've got a couple of other questions, but perhaps I'll wait till we've seen Nisha's presentation. So I'll just pass over to you, Nisha. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alpa. Just share my screen. Okay, just checking you're seeing this in full screen.
Yes.
Before I get going, great. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Nisha Kurian. I'm an associate, and I'm an architect, and I work at a practice called We Made That. I am also a program leader on Reset Go, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So Reset Go, it's set up, it's an accessible, hands-on, paid workplace experience and mentoring program established with the mission of diversifying architecture practices. So I think we can all agree that architecture as a profession it's pretty white. It can also quite often feel very male. And something about this doesn't add up at all in a place, especially in a place like London that's so diverse and kind of multicultural. So one of the reasons we set up Reset Go was as a way of kind of actively kind of creating opportunities or pathways into the sector for people from backgrounds that are underrepresented in architecture at the moment. And we were looking for ways for practices to become, I guess, more inclusive and also just be able to kind of reflect better the demographics of the city, this city that we're kind of living and working in. And so I think we all generally feel that having more diversity in those voices that are involved in shaping that built environment, that the environment that we all have to experience and negotiate every day, is so important, because it kind of serves to make that more well considered in terms of the spaces and also the conversations that we're having, and also just making those places more feel more inclusive. So Reset Go is led by 4 South London practices. It's us, We Made That. It's If Do and Gord Scott are the, there's 4 program leaders and 3 practices. So you've got me, and I'm in some very good company of some very impressive women. So there's Holly Lewis of We Made That, Fiona Scott of Gord Scott, and Sarah Castle of If Do, who are leading the program. And it's also in its kind of pilot year. So this is a very new program. And being that it's in its first year, there are activities that we have organized and we put on that are accessible to people living in 4 boroughs in South London. And I'll go on to explain why these kind of criteria apply a little bit later. But those 4 boroughs, that's Lambeth, Lewisham, Southwark, and Wandsworth. And so there is a kind of eligibility criteria in terms of who can apply and who can take part in the opportunities presented by the program at the moment. So that's for the kind of paid work placements, the workshops, and the one-to-one mentoring. There's a criteria that you must be from an underrepresented group. You must be between the ages of 16 and 24 years old, or you must be a kind of new practice or a startup. And that's for those 3 activities, but we are also organizing and planning these more public kind of knowledge exchange events that will be open to all. And in terms of the structure, how the program is funded, it's funded by an organization called Stride. So Stride were formerly the South London Innovation Corridor. So as I said here, their mission is to make space for creativity and innovation to thrive in South London. And so it's backed by these kind of 4 councils that I talked about. And it's the Reset Go program is also supported by the London Practice Forum, as Dinah has explained, what that's about. So the London Practice Forum is really kind of what makes this program possible. Because it's employer-led, what we really needed, this kind of coordinated, this kind of organized collective of practices of employers to be able to, host the placements and also just contribute their time and resource towards facilitating the activities that are put on as part of this program. So what's on offer and what are we delivering through this? So we've set a target through Reset Go for this pilot year to offer 150 people from underrepresented backgrounds the kind of experience and skills and an opportunity to make connections and inroads and pathways to help them prepare for kind of future employment in architectural practice. And we're doing that, so we're delivering that through these 4 strands of the program. So the first is work placements. The second is one-to-one mentoring sessions and CV surgeries. We're also organizing a number of workshops. And finally, these more public knowledge exchange events that we'll be setting up. And so the first of these strands, the kind of paid work placements, what they were intended, they were set up as a way to give participants an opportunity to kind of work for a period of time at one kind of leading London architecture practice. So one of the practices from the London Practice Forum. And it kind of gives people the experience of what it's like to be a practicing architect, to get that kind of exposure. And through the practice forum, because of the kind of array and variety of different types of practices that we are, everyone has different specialisms and different ways of doing architecture. So offering that through the London Practice Forum means that we've tried to, through the application process, try and align the applicants in terms of what they've expressed to be their kind of interests, try and align those and match make with the practice that might be able to kind of facilitate a more productive kind of experience for them. And this isn't obviously always straightforward. A lot of the participants are school age, so it's also kind of about exposure to those different ways of doing things in architecture, and also just more generally, it's also about exposure to kind of being in a professional environment within the kind of built environment sector. And so it's the work placements we feel are kind of it's like a foot in the door of the industry that helps people kind of build connections and create networks with a range of practices. For example, one of the participants that have come through the Recycle program has already been hired by one of the London Practice Forum practices. So that feels like very kind of a direct demonstration of how these like inroads are created, and you're creating these opportunities for people from underrepresented backgrounds. And so far we've carried out 15 of the 21 1 week placements. So there's two types of placements. There's 1 week placements and 6 weeks more intense placements. And 6 of the six weeks placements have either been completed or they're currently underway. The second strand of activities that we're offering is one-to-one mentoring. And so this offers a kind of 1 hour session, which can be booked with a Recycle mentor. And there's a number of people who volunteered from the London Practice Forum at various levels of their kind of career as well to be mentors on the program. And so you can really, it's an opportunity to discuss anything, any interest that you have that or that you're curious about in terms of architectural practice or the built environment in general. This outlines some of those topics that have come up through mentoring sessions. So it can range from anything from somebody wanted to speak about intersectional feminism in architecture, as well as environmental design. And it can range from something like that to the more pragmatic end, which is talking about with an industry professional, talking about something like how to negotiate your salary and how to negotiate a pay rise with an employer, or more straightforward kind of the CV surgeries are geared towards portfolio feedback, getting feedback on that and kind of planning and kind of getting ready to be to go into kind of employment. The third set of activities that we've set up is a number of group workshops. So each of these are facilitated by a member practice from the London Practice Forum. And one of the criteria of these workshops is that we're always teaming up with a kind of chosen collaborator. So we've got the 4 here. So there's Rye Lane Through Young Eyes, and that's being led by ZCD with Nimtim Architects. So that's one that Dinah will be leading. And then there's Building Communities for Everyone. That's May, teaming up with Urban Symbiotics. The People's Market, which we are delivering with ALPA. And finally, Reconnect with Lambeth, which is RCK, teaming up with Salads. And each of these will have at least 6 participants, and they're kind of half-day-ish workshops looking at different aspects of the kind of built environment and the city that we live in. And they are kind of focused around those 4 South London boroughs as well, just by chance. So also these workshops and the one-to-one sessions, I have to put a bit of a plug in here. These are open for booking. So if you head to our website, which I'll put in the chat later on, you can sign up to one of these workshops or sign up for a mentoring session through the program if you meet those kind of eligibility criteria, as I was saying earlier. So right from the launch of the program, what we have seen is there's been a lot of interest from people across the sector, across architecture and wider actually, to be involved with the program. And as it stands, due to the kind of current structure of the kind of organization and the funding structure for this pilot phase, there are some limitations, which is about the eligibility criteria and being kind of sticking to those 4 boroughs. But what we want to do through the program at kind of each step or each part of the program is to try and involve more people and get as many voices to participate and be a part of not just kind of participating in the program as one of the kind of candidates for one of those activities, but also to be the people that are actually delivering the project, the program. And I think also, we think, you know, from my perspective at least, like it's quite good to see people that look like you who are succeeding in the field. So, you know, these collaborations that we're trying to engineer through the different parts and strands of the program are really important. So one of the team ups that I'm really excited about and wanted to talk about was this collaboration that we have with After Party. So After Party, if you don't know who they are, they're a collective of design critics and writers. And this is from their website. They're championing underrepresented voices in architecture and design. So After Party have joined us. So they're on board and they're in a role that they themselves are calling kind of critical friends of the program. So what they're helping us do is they're going to kind of review the program and essentially challenge us during the course of this pilot phase. And they're doing this through dialogue with both the kind of participants in the program, but also with the kind of the people delivering the program, the practices and collaborators, etc. In order to be able to kind of help reflect on and basically build on the experiences of the people involved and ultimately learn from that, because it is this pilot phase, so that ultimately we can ensure that the program in the future is as sustainable as possible, and is as effective as possible. So they're going to be, and I quote, they're checking and challenging our biases to ensure that RESECO centers its participants' voices as educational, empowering, and uplifting as possible. So yeah, one of the kind of part of the outcomes, one of the things that they've produced for RESECO is this practice placement agreement, which is something that we're using as a kind of contract between the paid work placement participants and the practices. And so, as you can see here, it's, you know, it's helping facilitate this kind of open and productive dialogue between the employer and the participant. And what we're trying to do is make an effort to understand, you know, what are people's interests and what do they want to kind of gain from the experience, and then setting out a structure with which to have this dialogue and explore those different topics. So architecture is made up of all these elements, and ensuring that in their placements they are getting exposure to the different sides of practice and the different facets of the job. But so this kind of matrix is setting that out, but it's used as a tool. So this is something that we that the kind of host practice, the mentor, will run through with each of the candidates at the beginning of the process to, you know, to be able to set out some goals and set out almost a bespoke kind of work experience plan for each person. And then at the end of the process, you kind of come back to it and reflect on, you know, how you either met or didn't meet those goals and what worked and what could have worked better. And that's feedback that we're getting from both the participants and the practices, as I said. So we're constantly kind of learning and discovering through the process. And then we've also been keen, I guess, especially in this moment where we're kind of working from home in this kind of COVID environment, which hasn't made things as easy as it would have been, or as nice, I guess, as it would have been if everyone could be in a practice in the office. So, but what we're also keen to do is make sure that we're creating networks, not just between these individuals and these architecture practices, but also across the kind of wider cohort itself, so that participants, you know, people that are your peers at a certain stage in your career are making contacts and creating networks with each other, and then also networks with these practices in people on the kind of inside of the industry. So every Thursday we have these sessions where the LPF host practices. Each session is hosted by one practice, and it brings the whole cohort together. And it's people who are in placements or people who had been in placements. It's kind of open to all the people involved in the program to come together and discuss a kind of topic of interest. So it's from anything like public space, which is one that we hosted earlier this year, to talking about kind of high streets, to kind of more general things, such as talking about people's kind of interests or inspirations. This particular slide is from the first session, which was a kind of icebreaker session, which is, you know, how do you get a bunch of young people who've never met each other to kind of be in a space together and start to get to know each other. So yeah, that was a kind of key part of the program. And so, as I mentioned, it's the kind of pilot phase, and what happens next is a very big part of what we're currently thinking about. So what we want to do first is kind of complete the set of activities, the placements, the mentoring, have these knowledge exchange public events, which will be more about a kind of reflective process, but also it's kind of celebratory for the participants, the people that were involved in the first year. But also we're right now like really actively and quite crucially thinking about what is going to be the legacy of the program. And as we've always wanted from the beginning, you know, we want to be able to expand it to include as many of those practices who've expressed interest as possible, to expand it to include more participants in terms of that eligibility criteria broadening, and just to be able to kind of make a greater impact in the future. So we're feeling quite optimistic about this at the moment, and how, you know, we hope to see the program kind of grow in the coming years. So I guess kind of watch the space. And I'll end on this, which is the link to the Recycle website. So please do check it out. As I said, there's a number of activities happening that you can book onto, and also just to find out more about it. But I understand we also have a kind of question process, answer process. So
that's great. Thank you so much, Nisha, and thank you, Dinah, as well. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned that there's been a lot of interest in the program. I think that's true. I think that's primarily because it's very pragmatic. It strikes me as very simple. I'm sure not simple to organise, but it's very simple and straightforward and pragmatic. When it can sometimes feel like there's a lot of discourse around addressing diversity and perhaps a bit less action as far as that is concerned. There are some questions coming through. So there's a question from Holly, thank you for your question, which says it's a great initiative, and also whether you could see an opportunity for a similar approach from a local authority perspective, so involving young and underrepresented groups from the other side by holding placements with planning services. And there's an invitation to follow up with the chat. But is that something that you would consider doing, or even just partnering? Do you think there's space to kind of partner with local authorities?
Yeah, I think definitely. So in the kind of interest that we've received, so it's not just been from practices or kind of individuals. We have also had, you know, we work with the public sector mainly. So we have had kind of councils, the GLA approaching us. So really that's the kind of thing that we are looking at for, you know, for the legacy of this Reset Go program, how we can make it more wide reaching. And I think having that local authority or public sector involvement in the program would be a great way to do that. I mean, you did say earlier, it's quite a simple kind of concept, but actually like the coordination and the administrative side of it is very time consuming and very kind of, yeah, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to kind of do these things. And actually the public sector might be one of those kind of organizations, I guess, where there is the capacity and potentially the reach to carry on something like this, so to take it to its next level. So it is definitely something we're considering.
Yeah.
And also this question of kind of expanding it. So it is very much about kind of architecture practices at the moment, and that's how it's set up. But I think, you know, there is so much crossover, and it definitely can be something wider that is about the built environment sector more broadly.
And I would like to bring you back in a moment, Dinah, as well, but just briefly, because you touched on something that I was thinking about, which is about resource and how kind of resource heavy, you know, a project like this is, and how you kind of manage that.
This is about
just for Reset Go or for London Forum, but yeah, I mean, it strikes me because you've got all these programs running at the moment.
Yeah.
That's particularly with Reset Go.
Yeah, I mean, so as I said, it's very kind of labor intensive. There's a lot of planning and there's a lot of coordination and kind of chasing to get things, to receive information on time, because there is a whole kind of process. So there's these activities that are the kind of the front of house, I guess, side of the program, but behind that there's a lot of comms, there's kind of outreach, there's making people aware of the program and then getting them to apply. So it's kind of iterative and it's constant, but yeah, we've definitely, it's been a massive learning curve to, we're not kind of events organizers. We do that in a kind of public community engagement level on projects, but yeah, it's been something quite different, but also kind of amazing. And I think that the fact that there's been all of these people are suddenly kind of trying to approach us and say, we want to be involved, I think it just needed that spark, somebody to kind of do it or kickstart it and show that something's possible, and loads of people want to do something like this but haven't had the resource. And that's where the Stride funding has been so critical, because there is funding to allow that kind of administrative, organizational, the process, the behind the scenes process to happen, which is not something that you find very easily. There's not kind of tenders for this kind of thing. It was an open call from Stride for innovative ways to kind of make the creative industry more inclusive or more diverse. And that's where it came from.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to the London Practice Forum a bit as well, I mean, obviously the Reset Go program has kind of arrived out of that, and I just wondered if there are other kind of strands or programs that are sort of bubbling away. And I'm thinking perhaps like the climate crisis, or if there are sort of other projects or strands, I mean, or if that's not something that can be really taken on given like the resource that's involved.
Yeah, I think there is an element of people kind of surviving this bit and working out how to come back into the office. Sorry. So I have had lots of conversations a year ago so about how we could collaborate on research, bringing our sort of knowledge together and presenting that out. I think I think that the other thing I was talking about was whether we could have some kind of an event. I suppose that we're awash with them, aren't we, online at the moment? And actually, we really wanted that event to be that opportunity for younger practice members to find a kind of connection, because I think from a climate crisis point of view, it's an interesting point. There's a lot of knowledge out there, but it feels like we all need to kind of take part in this. I mean, it's a different conversation, but and I don't know if this is true to say, but just externally examining it at a university this last week and sort of saying to the course leaders, look, even a few years ago, it might have been about expecting students to sort of understand what the issues are, but I'm wondering now whether it's actually expecting students to come out with a level of kind of understanding and radical agenda that's going to really push us as practices who are perhaps being a little bit slow, like the big kind of super tankers that some of us are. And I do think for me, that's the bit I'd really like to explore, that next layer down within the practices and how we can connect up. We had a very interesting, I think it was we had an online discussion with the London Practice Forum early on in the pandemic with I can't remember the name, the union, the architectural union, the SAW, I think they're called, aren't they? And I think they were really, really keen to see how you know, we were sort of showing them that we were doing good practice, and so they were then sort of kind of going, well, how can you support us more, sort of thing, and can we collaborate? And I think for me, and what Nisha and the Reset Go program is doing is absolutely brilliant, and I really want to get involved in the kind of evaluation part of it too, because I think it's going to teach us about what we're doing in our practice with engagement. There's a lot of cross learning, but I'm quite interested in that next layer down and how we tap into them and get them to kind of force us to do things that might make us feel a bit uncomfortable, because you know, a lot of the stuff that's happening at the moment is about making us all feel a bit uncomfortable, isn't it? And changing the ways that we practice, because if it's not making us feel uncomfortable, then we're not changing. So I think that would be, you know, that's the next level for me.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I don't think progress is always a comfortable ride for everyone. You talked about evaluation. I have got a question about that, but we have got a question from Mel, so I will just read that first. So the question is about the Rye Lane project that you mentioned, Nisha, through young people's eyes, and whether you could just give us a bit more info.
I might actually direct this one back to Dinah, because that's the workshop that you're running.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so we're doing two things in the next few weeks. One is the 1 week placement, and then the other one is a 1.5 day workshop. Actually, it's quite hard to squeeze everything into half a day, isn't it? And we're doing that with Nim Tim. And so Mel, please, Mel, I don't know where you're coming from, if you know what I mean, whether you're thinking of a young person or thinking of learning from it or whatever. But yeah, we're recruiting for that workshop. Quite excited that we're working with a few schools in South London, so I think hopefully we can get some young people through that. But the idea is that we want to get, I think what I'm quite interested in is, sorry to bring this back to the work we do in practice, but there's a bit of overlap, is the work we do with young people is partly skill building, but we're quite conscious to not do too much skill building, because we want to be able to listen to their voices, and that's very much about how we need to bring that conversation into regeneration. But there's a bit of both. There's a bit of listening and a bit of skill building, and I'm quite interested in that next level where you say, okay, there's something that you know about this local area that we need to know, but at the same time we need to sort of take you to that next level where you can start to have conversations with people that might start to mimic, if you like, what is going to happen in your career. And I think that's another quite interesting way of saying, and maybe there's a learning that kind of two-way learning thing that we can be doing in our practice, which is, if you're going to change, then you have to shift your position from, you know, I have to shift my position from where I am, and I have to start thinking, you know, how can we better help young people into practice by being better at having those dialogues and conversations about places that aren't just on our terms and saying, this is how we do architecture, this is the language you need to learn, this is the kind of format of it. Because that's the reason why we don't have so many young people from diverse backgrounds coming in, I think. On the other hand, I don't want to patronise and treat them like, you know, we're doing an engagement project. So we're going to work on a project for half a day in Rye Lane, looking at the way things have changed and what they might think about how change could happen in the future, and what that might mean in terms of, you know, architectural briefs. And we're leaving it a lot to Nim Tim, who are local practice. So for us as well, that's a way of kind of giving them a foothold in this and getting them to start running it. So it's very much, we're working with their practice and thinking about how to do it, and bringing in local counsellors as well into that process. So we are developing it now. It'll be quite quick. The main thing is we want to get some visual outputs, because that's always really catchy, you know, models, drawings, photographs, whatever we can of like, what's it like in Rye Lane? What do we need to know?
Yeah, oh, it sounds great. And okay, so just about evaluation, because that was something that you mentioned, and obviously you want to be able to evaluate how well all these programs are going. I mean, Nisha, you mentioned you actually are over halfway through the 1 week placements, and you've completed the 6 week placements. So I mean, what are some of the things that have come out of that? I'm assuming there's been a sort of process of refinement as it's gone along as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what kind of things have come out of that?
I think we've learned a lot. So with the process, there's been a huge learning curve about how to deliver kind of work placement that is, I guess, kind of mutually beneficial for the practices and the placementees, and it's different. So we had a way to kind of structure. So the 1 week placements were for younger participants, people who perhaps haven't had any exposure to kind of architecture or the industry before, and then the 6 weeks more intensive ones were with people who are in. They tended to be people who are at university. So we kind of organized those. So some of those are happening in the summer holidays now. Some have already happened. But yeah, like the kind of communication and the ability to communicate about what's happening or what they're going to learn through the process, and like what happens on a day to day in an architecture practice, doing that with people who haven't been in a professional environment before via Zoom has been incredibly challenging. And it's actually made us really think about, so we don't do a lot of work placements, but it has made us really rethink about the way that we support and kind of mentor younger employees in our office. So the kind of part ones and part twos straight out of uni, you know, just making sure that we're, because we learned quite a lot from this practice placement agreement that After Party put together, because it is such a great tool to think so broadly about everything that we do. I mean, it's so easy to kind of get stuck or zoom into one specific aspect, and you know, and you end up kind of having a year in experience as a part one where you don't get a lot of experience of the different parts of a process of kind of delivering a project. And this, so we are thinking about kind of setting up more formally this kind of mentoring process within the office. It's the kind of thing that happens quite informally and a lot more kind of naturally when you're all together in an office environment. But working from home, it's something that needs a bit more kind of reinforcement. So immediate finding, that's been something that we're finding. And then more broadly, so this is about very much about process, but more broadly, we've had, so the person, Kimberly, who did a work placement with us, you know, one of the things she came out with, out of the process with, was she said, you know, she didn't actually know coming out of uni as a part one that architecture could be this array of things. You do get taught a very specific way of doing architecture, especially in certain schools. And I guess we made that, like, we do very different things as well. So we have kind of more research-based work and more strategy-based work, and then delivery projects. But I think exposure to that at that stage, she expressed that as being something quite valuable. And yeah, I think this question of, you know, there's many ways of doing architecture, and what are these other ways that you can practice in the built environment, is something that I think came out through a lot of the placements where young people are very, very much interested in that. And that might be a sign of times, I guess, but it's quite an exciting thing to be happening. I certainly think.
And is there a mentoring program across the London Practice Forum?
As so
kind of a, yeah.
Oh, kind of separate to Reset Go?
Yeah, or yeah, that works across the London Practice Forum. I mean, is that something that's ever been discussed?
No, there isn't. The only thing we have, which we've kind of built up to sort of support staff, is we have a kind of secondment arrangement, so that if there's not enough work, you can kind of swap people around a little bit, and that's helpful, I think, because, you know, it's the kind of the peaks and the troughs in the industry are really crippling and really miserable for everybody, and trying to even those out. But no, there isn't a mentoring program. And I think what's interesting is that everybody mentors in quite different ways, actually, which is why the Reset Go program is quite good, because it's a kind of, you know, it's a shopping list. It's a variety of things that you can sign up to, and you'll notice that some of the practices have done the 6 week one suits them better, and the 1 week one suits us better. So I think that's what's good. It's got a good range, which means that we can all get involved.
Mm. I also had a question about how you go about inviting these groups. I mean, I'm thinking specifically for the Reset Go program, but also, Dinah, with your work just generally in child-friendly cities. I mean, because we can be very good as architects at sort of, you know, talking to ourselves, kind of getting stuck in our own networks as well. And how you go about, I mean, is it mostly through schools, or how do you go about engaging young people?
Shall I answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we have done in the past quite a lot of work with youth groups, but increasingly recently we've done more with schools, the one big thing that we do is we pay them, which is the same as the Reset Go program, and it's just so important because it just values people and it attracts people and young people, and you know, it helps us to get them to focus, and it's a different kind of engagement, because it's not engagement that's about like the kind of democratic part of the planning process, which is really important. Like, what do you think about this? It's about, you're a focus group, we need to hear from you and we need to work with you, and you have to pay focus groups for their time because it's quality stuff, isn't it? So, you know, the amount that you're paying somebody, if you're paying them the London minimum wage, you know, we just tell them we're paying them £10 an hour, and you know, of course they're delighted, they're enjoying it, they're getting paid, and it's that, for us, that's the biggest reason it works, I think.
I think that aspect of kind of remuneration is important as well. In Reset Go, we're trying to specifically reach certain groups, right? So it's not people that are going to be able to do a kind of unpaid work placement for a week or 6 weeks. Like, we're being realistic that, you know, you have to pay people to make that a realistic proposal for them, but also it's not just about the kind of payment for the placement. It's also looking at things like stipends for travel and subsistence. You know, all of this makes it much easier to reach the groups that you're trying to target.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are at 7:30, but I have just got one last question, which was about the matchmaking process, and you know, how you go about doing that, and you know, bearing in mind it's young people who might not know exactly what they are after actually in their placement, and how you sort of divine that and kind of, you know, create a good match.
Yeah. In one word, spreadsheets. I mean, it sounds so boring, but it is really about kind of getting as much from their application as possible, and actually just circulating that with the people that have volunteered to either do placements or mentoring in London Practice Forum. And then there's a process of people looking through that and going, actually, I feel like I can answer this question and I can have this discussion with someone. And then inevitably, when you don't get the response, you're kind of going to a person that you think would be, or the place that you think would be the right place to kind of lead them or signpost them. So it's a bit.
You're basically brilliant, Nisha. You're brilliant at doing this. Keeping it going from my end, you are brilliant.
So it's just intuition. Is that what it comes down to?
Yeah, it's kind of, you try as much as you can, right? But yeah, if you don't get it right, you've got another try.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I know we're going to be hearing more about the Reset Go programme, as it's definitely going to go from strength to strength, as well as the London Practice Forum. And also, I wanted to know, actually, can practices apply to join the London Practice Forum?
Yeah, so this is one of the big questions. They can, but what we tried to do recently was target our recruitment. So we actually went out and approached practices, because if you look a particular kind of way, you're going to automatically attract more people like you. So we had to sort of say no to lots of practices that wanted to join us. That's one of the things about trying to push diversity. So you can, but for now, I think there might be other ways of setting up other forums that might be a good idea.
Very interesting. Well, let's hope there are more forums. Well, thank you so much to everyone who's joined and tuned in today, and also for the questions. And most of all, thank you, Nisha and Dinah. And good night, everyone, and do take care.